Can I introduce myself firstly as Tim Markets? I appeared as Senior Counsel for the City of Melbourne in a long-run dispute over this issue, and then eventually, when that proceeding came to an end, I then appeared on behalf of the Owners Corporation in the recent case in front of Justice Freedom, whereby the issue of the validity of the Owners Corporation rule prohibiting short-term lettings was subsequently determined to be contrary to the interests of the Owners Corporation and found to be invalid. I just want to go back very, very quickly just by way of background, just a little bit about the way that this whole issue commenced with the City of Melbourne taking involvement at the request of the Owners Corporation. The Owners Corporation being, of course, this particular Owners Corporation for the Watergate building in Docklands. And what happened was that the Owners Corporation, back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, identified that there was approximately 30 to 40 units in the building being used for short-term accommodation. And some of those operators or users were using the units respectfully to the neighbours, to the adjoining property owners or unit holders. Others, of course, were using the units in a manner that was causing maximum inconvenience and or disruption to the amenity of the other unit holders in the building. So the City of Melbourne decided to commence an action whereby, under the Building Act, they sought to place notices on those persons that were using the units for short-term accommodation, requiring them in essence to convert those units into, meet the requirements of the Building Code of Australia, to make them akin to a hotel room. And in general terms, you may or may not be aware that hotel rooms or rooms that are used or recognised by the relevant building laws, the national building laws, that are used for short-term accommodation have different building requirements than otherwise an owner-occupied sole occupancy unit placed in the city. And the reason for that generally is that a short-term occupant has different familiarity with the building they're staying in compared to a long-term resident. And that lack of familiarity, of course, means that there are different needs for their safety requirements and also for the common areas pertaining to the use by those short-term residents. And so what happened was that the City of Melbourne, at the behest of the Owners Corporation, issued building notices requiring the owners to undertake certain works on the units. And unfortunately, in due course, it was determined that those building notices were invalid. And what happened was that the Court of Appeal determined that, in fact, the action taken by the City of Melbourne could not prevent the use of the units in the manner that were so being used under the relevant legislation, under the Building Act. So what then happened was that by the very nature of the City of Melbourne taking the action, the number of residents, the number of units being used for short-term accommodation decreased. Initially at the outset it was 40 to 50 units or 30 to 40 units, and then a lot of the more disruptive operators moved up. One particular disruptive operator moved out, and so there's only one other operator, and they maintained 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 units being used for short-term accommodation. So after the inability of the City of Melbourne to stop the activity, it was decided by the Owners Corporation to rely upon one of the rules of the Owners Corporation, which was the rule prohibiting the use of a unit for short-term commercial accommodation less than 30 days, to be acted upon. So under the Owners Corporation Act, you may not be aware there's a series of notices that are served, etc., a series of formal requirements that have to be satisfied, and eventually an enforcement proceeding is then taken on the basis of the failure to comply with the relevant notices. What happened was that the particular operator who was still using those units for short-term accommodation, just so you know what the operators do and what I would envisage will happen more relevantly or more frequently throughout the City of Melbourne now, will be that an operator will go to a particular building. They will offer the owner of the unit a fixed rent, say $650 a week for a 2-bedroom apartment. And if the apartment's in a good position, they'll then have the ability, under their residential agreement with the owner, to sublet that unit out for short-term stays. And a good operator could really turn a little 2-bedroom unit around the MCG or around Docklands or an Indian State and probably do $1,000 a week. It's a very simple method of business operation. You lease the unit from the owner of the property, you put an ad out for an internet advertisement, and then you start getting your short-term occupants. And they'll choose to use those units in that manner, the short-term occupants, rather than letting a hotel room. It's a lot cheaper. And it gives them a self-serviced apartment which can be, they can come and go, and they can probably use it over the weekends, etc., or other days. But in essence, it's probably might be half the price of letting a hotel room. The Owners Corporation, because of the prevalence of a growing number of short-term occupiers, have said, took this action, and we then, the operator asserted that the notices issued under the Owners Corporation Act were invalid because the rule was invalid. And that is that an owners corporation doesn't have the right to regulate the manner by which an apartment is so used. And the owners corporation really only has the right to regulate the manner by which common areas are used. And after a fairly long, protracted legal battle, the court did determine that in fact an owners corporation is set up in essence with the specific purpose generally to manage and control common areas, and not with the right to manage or control the manner by which a person can use an apartment. And in general terms, therefore determined that such a rule by which the owners corporation seeks to manage the use of the apartment was invalid. Now the important thing to note there is that if one went round all the owners corporations around the City of Melbourne, in fact the State of Victoria, which has existed for 30, 40, 50 years, also under the earlier legislation, most owners corporations, or body corps as they're known as, would have a similar rule. They would have a rule whereby the owners corporation seeks to prevent the manner by which an owner can use the apartment if it is contrary to the interests or the lifestyle or the amenity issues of the other residents in the building. And the reason, over the years it's always been thought that was a valid use of power by an owners corporation. Going back to that issue where I started about talking about the Building Act, it's important to recognise that it's been well recognised by the national building laws that the behavioural patterns of short-term residents are different to the behavioural patterns of long-term residents, and that the integration or the intermingling of the short-term residents with long-term residents can provide a source of conflict and loss of amenity to those that are living nearby. And logically, although there was some debate in the case about questions of evidence on those issues, logically it stands to reason that if you're there as a short-term resident compared to a long-term resident, your behavioural patterns are going to be different. You'll go to the football on a Saturday night or a Friday night, and you might have a few drinks, etc. You might go out later on, and then you'll come home at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and you'll slam your door to your apartment. Simple as that. And you might put on the TV. Now, normally at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, there's silence in the building. And just the mere fact that there's someone regularly slamming a door at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning after they return, being a short-term holiday maker, that's going to cause interference and loss of amenity to the otherwise permanent residents in the building. And it happened, as there are many residents here today know of Watergate, which is a 349 unit building. But at Watergate it happened to such an extent in the early days that the building became commonly referred to as Partygate. And the concept that those lifestyle characteristics of a short-term occupant compared to a long-term occupant are no different really belies the evidence that no doubt many of the people here that have lived in these high-rise buildings have gone through and experienced. And when it became known as Partygate, of course, at that stage Watergate was suffering from numerous short-term occupants using the apartments merely for partying or for bucks parties or hens parties, and there was significant evidence as to, one would say, fairly irrational behaviour by the short-term occupants, which just wouldn't be the behaviour of a long-term occupant. In any event, what's happened now, as I've indicated or stated to you, is that Mr Justice Reardon recently determined that the Owners Corporation does not have the power under the Owners Corporation Act to prevent short-term occupation, and determined in essence that the Owners Corporation does not have the power to make rules as to the manner by which the apartment is used. So it may not only be short-term occupation that's prohibited, it might be the running of a hairdressing salon. Your neighbour might choose to determine that they'll use the unit as a hairdressing salon or a beauty salon. There'll be very little the Owners Corporation can do to stop that. In fact, there'll be nothing the Owners Corporation can do to stop that, although it may be contrary to a planning law, that might be a different issue. But at the moment, because it will go to the regulation of use, and the Owners Corporation doesn't in essence have the ability to regulate the use of the apartment, subject to there being events by reason of use that cause danger or nuisance. But in general terms, the mere conducting of business activity, whether it be for short-term accommodation or some other business activity, won't be viewed as contrary to any other restrictions under the Owners Corporation Act. Now, what's happened since that decision? Since that decision, it's already been applied by VCAT in another recent case, whereby VCAT has determined a couple of weeks ago that as a result of the inability of the Owners Corporation to regulate the use of an apartment, you can't regulate or restrict the Owners Corporation to keeping of pets in an apartment, for example. So here it might be that now that, let's say for example, the Owners Corporation that runs Watergate doesn't believe it's in the interest of the overwhelming majority of the residents that there should be owners keeping large dogs in the apartment block. Well, if they sought to enforce a rule that had that effect, it would also be struck down as invalid. So I think we're really at the start of it's just the start of what the consequence of this decision is going to result in. It's a start, it's like on the top of the slide, and I would envisage there to be very good argument made now by competent legal representation to strike down many rules of owners' corporations which seek to regulate in any way how an owner, or what an owner does in their apartment. And that would have the consequential effect I can see as affecting the amenity and lifestyle choices made of otherwise permanent residents. It will also have the consequential effect of possibly increasing the cost of the quarterly contributions the service fees that owners have to make to the body corporate, because, for example, it's going to be needed upkeep the common areas further, etc., more maintenance of this, etc., etc. And the consequences are yet to be fully determined, but as I said previously, it looks like it's on the top of the slide, and heading down there's going to be significant consequences of the decision itself. So that's just a brief overview of what the current state of the law is. There are exceptions to what I've said, there are restrictions, etc., etc. But in general terms, the consequences are that unless there is some form of encumbrance upon the title, an owners corporation can't restrict the manner by which an owner uses that apartment, even though 99.9% of the other residents might say it's inappropriate. It might also lead to an argument that it could affect the capital value of units, because as it becomes greater knowledge, there's greater knowledge of the fact that an owners corporation can't restrict people using a floor of a building or half a floor of a building for short-term service accommodation. there would probably be a significant reluctance from a purchaser to buy into such a building because of the detrimental effects it will have to their lifestyle patterns. So there are challenges ahead for all owner-occupiers. The challenges ahead, no doubt, for the legislators as to how to deal and address this issue, because it is a very difficult issue because there are competing interests generally. But from the point of view of tonight's evening, on behalf of the Forum of Concerned Residents Against Commercial Short-Term Stays and Livability Issues in High-Rise, it appears that there should be at least, it seems, some form of restriction so that there isn't the ongoing intermingling of people that come for a short time, for a party time, with those that otherwise live in the building and have bought the unit on the basis of the existence of such a law restricting such activities. And remember, most people that are living in all the owner-occupied or the sole occupancy units around the city of Melbourne and or generally the state of Victoria, they've all bought on the understanding that the room next to them can't be used in the manner of a hotel room. But now, as a result of what the Supreme Court decided a month ago, that's wrong, and they're now facing the challenges that are going to be caused by the prospect of a short-term operator, and there are good and bad operators deciding to lease other units in the building and then subletting them out on an ad hoc basis. So that's a very brief overview, and now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Barbara Francis, who is a retired hydrologist and a high-rise resident in Watergate since 2004 and chairperson of the Watergate Owners Corporation Committee.
Thank you very much, Tim. A very concise and clear introduction to tell us where we've come and really we've started on the next phase of this journey now. But it's five long years of going through the courts, and one thing that it has been achieved by going through the courts, if nothing else, I don't see it as just been all lost, because what we've gained from that is a true clarity around the law relating to these issues. So the Watergate case, although protracted, has now provided us with clarity around the law. It's shown up anomalies in the Building Code of Australia, which unfortunately is a federal matter so unlikely to be rectified anytime soon. There's also shown up anomalies in local and state planning laws which can be rectified. And we have learned that owners corporations don't have the power to make rules about change of use of lot, even rules inherited from the developer at the time of purchase. So what does this mean for residents of high and low-rise apartment buildings? Well, short-term letting can go on unabated. Even a covenant on title restricting stays to 90 days or more is not immune from challenge from the courts. And this issue now is no longer a Watergate issue, but one that affects all of us in high-rise buildings. The We Live Here movement can now become a voice for all residents affected by these issues. Launched just 8.5 months ago, we now represent over 140 buildings from around the Greater Melbourne area and beyond, including interstate and overseas. With academics, town planners, architects, strata and building managers and others just curious about this new group, making up our large and growing supporter base. I think we are well placed to take up the fight, and it is good to see so many of you here tonight. So what can we do about it? Well, firstly, we can lobby local and state planning laws so that it can be amended to make them uniform across the state and bring them into line with New South Wales, where a council permit is required before a lot can be used for short-term letting. We can also lobby for the regulation of the short-stay industry. Governments have been blinded by the growth of Airbnb, which is only an online booking platform, whilst ignoring the bigger picture and the fundamental issues affecting residential buildings that are being used ad hoc for short stays. There needs to be a level playing field for all. So how can this be achieved? By governments listening to the residents affected on a daily basis by the realities of short-term letting, and by governments having the will to pass the appropriate laws. The best the government has come up with today is to introduce a bill giving powers to owners corporations to deal with unlawful behaviour, powers that we already have. They've been given additional powers to VCAT to impose penalties on naughty owners. By the time such cases find their way into VCAT, the offending guests will have long since departed. But in this bill there is no mention of the short stay operators, who may have numerous apartments under management, who get off scot-free without paying taxes, who don't feel the need to abide by the rules of the building, or the residents who bought their apartments as their home in a building classified as residential only, and clearly not designed for quasi-hotel style accommodation. These key players are not mentioned at all in this new bill. So what messages do we need to pass on to the government? To ask them to please come and visit us and see the situation yourselves. Don't just rely on independent panels that have flawed members on a flawed composition of the panel. But please come and visit us and see for yourself. And to discover that not all apartment buildings are alike and designed for short stays. There are some that are, like purpose-built buildings such as Quest, they're perfectly okay. There are mixed-zone buildings, which are partly okay, but they separate hotel rooms from short stays and long-term residential apartments. They are okay so long as there is no drift between the short stay zone into the long stay zone, and I know that has been a problem in some cases. But then you've got the third class, the residential class 2 buildings that were not designed for short stays, that is home to the majority of residents living there, owner-occupiers and long-term residents and tenants, and where communities are built. This is difficult to achieve when your neighbours change all the time and you have to share the lift with laundry bags, cleaning materials and suitcases. We Live Here Now has produced a draft policy on short stays in residential buildings. Briefly, it deals with a non-resident letting out an entire apartment, an occupier letting out an entire apartment while they travel elsewhere, an occupier letting out part of an apartment that they occupy, and there's also reference to the need for registration of all operators for short stay apartments, and with the local council, and online listings must display a validated registration number. You'll find the full policy on our website at welivehere.net. That's just a brief overview of it. Finally, why does this mean so much to me, and why am I not prepared to give up the fight? Well, Watergate has been my home for 12 years, and I just love living in Dockgate. It is truly an amazing lifestyle. It was designed as a lovely, family-friendly residential building, and there are all too few of those about today. Short stays started creeping in under the radar some years ago, reaching a peak in 2011, when 45 of 439 apartments were operating as short stays, with 4 to 5 operators, that Tim has already alluded to. Today we have 15 short stay apartments managed by one operator, which, because we are a building of 40 floors, 2 18-storey towers and a 4-storey podium, there should be fewer than one per 2 floors, if evenly distributed. However, because of the ad hoc nature of the business, I happen to have 2 on my floor, with the operator's apartment cum storeroom on the floor below. So I'm well aware of all the issues that many of you are grappling with on a daily basis. I too have seen it. So I'm prepared to fight for as long as it takes until these operations are regulated and we can reclaim our residential buildings for the purpose they were intended, our home. So in conclusion, it is hard to believe that Melbourne has been listed again as the most livable city in the world when we are fast becoming ghettos in the sky. It is quite obvious that the government has no real understanding of what is happening on their doorstep, that there are thousands of residents like me who actually like living in strata communities. That's why we bought there. We ask the government to not accept unquestioningly that Airbnb is the only way forward in this so-called sharing economy, when they don't really promote themselves for residential buildings. Instead, we would like the state government to take up the challenge and stand alongside other major cities in the world such as New York, San Francisco, London, Paris, Berlin, Barcelona, etc., who are all grappling with the same issues. If we did this and succeeded in overcoming all the obstacles, we could truly be called the most livable city in the world. So on behalf of the We Live Here movement, our advocacy group formed to give a voice to residents who are not being heard, we implore the government to start talking to us, to understand the real issues and to create a level playing field for all, so that we don't become a city of ghettos in the sky. I'm sure none of us here tonight would want that to happen. Thank you.
Gives us all a good understanding of how the residents are no doubt being affected by the intermingling of the short-term and long-term residents together in one building and the need for change. I now ask Ms. Ellen Sandell, the the state MP for the seat of Melbourne for the Greens, and a member of the Legislative Assembly since 2014 to address the forum.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for coming to my workplace. Usually to meet residents I'm going out into the electorate, but it's lovely to have you come to me, so thank you very much, and you're very welcome here. I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Russell North, he's the member for Morwell, and also the Consumer Affairs spokesperson for the Liberals. I'm the Consumer Affairs spokesperson for the Greens, which is one of the reasons I've taken on this issue, but of course the other reason is because it affects so many of my residents. I believe we'll also hear from Councillor Rohan later from the City of Melbourne as well. I just wanted to speak briefly about what is currently happening in Parliament in relation to this issue, and then touch on some of the broader issues. I'll talk obviously mostly about the short stay issue, but I do believe there are some broader livability issues that we need to address as well. So as background, this issue of short stay accommodation in the city was brought to my attention during the 2014 election campaign when I was a candidate. I wasn't yet a member of Parliament. And so many people brought it up with me at community forums that I realised it was something that really needed to be addressed. And I promised that I would do everything in Parliament to address the issue. In turn, that put a lot of pressure on the Labor Party, who were obviously competing with the Greens for several inner city seats, to do something. And the Labor opposition came out and promised that they would address this issue if they were elected. The problem is that that hasn't happened. What we saw, and many of you I know will already know this, what we saw was the Labor government put in place a panel process to look at some of the issues because they considered it so complex. The problem with that panel process is that the majority of representatives on the panel were from the industry or people who had interest in short stay accommodation, and there was completely inadequate representation of residents on that panel who are the ones who are affected. So, surprisingly, it really didn't come up with any recommendations that would deal with the issue at all, because they didn't want any change, because there was a vested interest in keeping the short stay industry going. And that was very disappointing, I know, to a lot of you. And then there was radio silence, really, from the government, until we saw this bill which passed the lower house last week. This bill purports to deal with the issue, and all the headlines say that it will deal with party houses. In fact, all it does is establish a complaints mechanism. So if a resident in the building notices that an occupier, a short stay occupier, has done some damage or has disrupted other residents, they can bring a complaint to the Owners Corporation, and eventually that can go to VCAT. But as Barbara touched on, it is a very onerous process, and potentially, because it is so onerous and long, in most cases, nothing will happen at the end of that complaints process. But the biggest problem with the legislation is that it just accepts that complaints will continue to happen, that the situation will continue, just like the status quo. It does nothing to affect the real issue or address the real issue. And the problem is that pretty much the government doesn't want to deal with the real issue, and they don't even really understand it. You'll notice in the media and in the minister's speeches, all the rhetoric is about party houses. Let's stop the party houses. Now, no doubt parties are a problem, but in fact, residents who've talked to me say that's not even the biggest issue, that it's about general amenity. It's about the fact that the buildings weren't designed for this kind of activity. It's about wear and tear on carpets and lifts. It's about community and the fact that residents bought into these apartments expecting to live in a high-rise community, and then had that taken away from them when they realised that so many apartments actually weren't even occupied full-time with the neighbours that they had expected to live near. And so this, for me, is also actually about how we want our city to be and what kind of city we want to live in. Do we want a city that's a community, where people are getting along with their neighbours, where it's lively and there's life and there's all different people from all walks of life living side by side and enjoying each other? Or do we want a city that's just full of mostly empty de facto hotels that only fill up on the weekends? I want to live in a community, and I know that most of you do too. One issue that hasn't been touched on that I'd like to focus on too is that it's also about housing affordability. Because if we allow all these residential buildings that were not built to the standards that hotels are supposed to be built to, that aren't taxed like hotels are taxed, if we allow these residential buildings to be turned into de facto hotels, people can buy them and then they get more money by putting them on Airbnb or a short stay provider and renting them out short term than they do renting it out to a long-term resident or selling it to a long-term owner-occupier. And if more and more people are buying up these residential apartments to rent them out as short stays, that means that there's fewer apartments for owner-occupiers, there's fewer apartments from renters, and people are pushed out of the city as accommodation becomes less and less affordable. And we won't be able to have lower income people in the city. We won't have essential workers in the city. It'll be very few people that can eventually afford to live in the city, and that's what we've seen happen in places like San Francisco. And that's why San Francisco, Seattle, other cities, as Barbara mentioned, have actually taken action to regulate the short-term industry and facilitating providers like Airbnb. And now the Greens are in favour of the sharing economy. I fundamentally believe in this day and age we must share our resources. We must get smarter about how we use our resources, and actually we can build a great community by doing that. But buying an apartment for the sole purpose of letting it on Airbnb full time, there's nothing sharing about that. And so cities like Seattle and San Francisco have models that I believe we need to look at. They might not be perfect for us, we might need to tweak them, but they do things like say, if you're a genuine occupier of a building, of an apartment, and you want to go away for a week, you can rent your apartment to someone, but they put a cap on it so that you can't do it too often. They say if you have a spare room and you'd like to rent that out every now and then, you can do that. As long as you're paying the adequate taxes, you're registering your apartment, you've got the appropriate safety and security measures, you can do that. But you cannot buy an apartment for the sole purpose of putting it on Airbnb full time, because that takes that apartment away from having a long-term occupant in it. So the question is, why isn't Victoria looking at some of these models and seeing if they'll work for us? And it's because the issue has been put in the too hard basket, and the government just wants a splashy headline to say we're dealing with party houses. Most people will look at that and move on. So it's our job to make sure that people understand that the government is not addressing this issue, and they need to start doing so. So this bill has not come before the upper house yet, and Russell and I and others are working together on what we might do when it does, to make sure that it actually starts to address some of these issues and isn't just waved through as being enough as dealing with these issues, because it is not. And what you can do is continue to hold forums like this. This has been incredibly effective. We saw the only reason that the government decided to even think about acting on the issue was because of the community pressure in the first place. Contact the Minister, it's not too late. Contact your upper house representatives, they'll be the ones who have to vote on it in a few weeks' time. And if you do live south of the river, particularly in South Bank, contact your local member, Minister Martin Fogel. He needs to hear from residents that they won't be voting for him if he doesn't do something to address this issue. There are many other issues that relate to inner city livability as well that we've been taking action on, and I don't have time to cover them all. But they're things like banning donations to political parties and candidates from big property developers. This still happens in our state, in our council, and it should not happen. I introduced a bill to ban that. Unfortunately, it was voted down by both the major parties. Getting a public school built in the inner city, which is a campaign we've been running with some mums in the Docklands for a number of years. I believe they're actually having a forum in the Docklands tonight, which is why they're not here. Getting rid of the ridiculous rules that say businesses in the City of Melbourne get 2 votes on council when residents only get 1, which leads to the election of people who don't always have city residents' best interests at heart. And of course, better apartment and planning standards to make sure, as Barbara said, we don't end up with a city that's just ghettos in the sky. They're just a few of the things that we've been working on and will continue to work on until they're fixed, because unlike a lot of representatives, myself, Rohan, most of your Greens representatives, we actually live here too. We actually live in the inner city, and we do so because we love it, we love the community, and we don't want to lose it. So thank you so much for taking action today.
Thank you for those words, and it's pleasing to know that the Legislative Council members are looking at addressing this issue in the future. And know that will be subject to further debate and discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Jeanette Corcoran, who is a social economist specialising in the field of social innovation and co-design. And Jeanette.
Thank you very much. We'll just pause for a moment while we, I'm not sure where we're on yet. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you about vertical dwelling in Melbourne. I'm sure many of you have seen this article that was in The Age earlier this week, and others tonight have spoken about the scenario of this type of future, the ghettos in the sky scenario. I, however, wish to spend my few minutes speaking to another also possible future, which I'll refer to as SkyPad scenario with a nod to the Jetsons. And this is all about opportunity cost. So, to start, Melbourne, like Sydney and to a lesser extent Brisbane, is undergoing the most significant change in its residential mode of living since the inception of these cities. This is significant. But as a mode of living, we are not the first to head down this path. Indeed, it's a path that many other cities have had to take much earlier, for better or for worse. Consider Hong Kong, which is often associated with the not so much better approach. But then there are people like Gary Chan. I know many of you here tonight are very familiar with the work of the architect Gary Chan and his 24-room reconfiguring apartment. For those of you who aren't familiar, Gary remodelled his childhood apartment, which he shared with his parents, 3 siblings and a tenant, to change, as he said, around him. These 24 different configurations utilise a series of movable walls, and you can see that beds turn into bathrooms, folding beds. Now, the real point of importance here is that while this is still impressive, this was done years ago. So what's happening in contemporary Hong Kong? Okay. Let me introduce you to a young couple with pets who engaged a local architect to redesign their very small apartment. The interesting point here is that these architects intentionally designed time as an aspect of their design. They mapped the way and the time that the space was used to give different areas functions that were time-related. Now, also important to this couple were their cats. They have 3. So the architect designed runs, ladders, and attended to their needs without impinging upon limited space. It was clever. It's clever design. So where else? The Netherlands. Again, not a place known for its wide open spaces. Here is an example of a student project utilising different material, polypropylene, I believe. Now, I've included it here because it's a different approach to using space. They actually, to the movable wall scenario, it's actually based upon, as you'll see coming up here, etching into the floors a series of pathways that this lightweight material can utilise, it can follow, and it can retract. So again, time, a temporal aspect was factored into design. Now, To be clear, this is an extreme example undertaken by students to prove a design concept, and I am in no way advocating that these dimensions should be what we aspire to. But consider how various elements of this could be incorporated. Lightweight design to serve as occasional furniture along predetermined pathways, and it would be particularly helpful to older people, I believe. Other nations. Well, other nations are actually... really good. Other nations are building their reputations focusing upon transforming furniture. Italy has long been known for advances in this area. I've included an example here of a transforming table. Now what's really clever about this is it's actually hydraulically controlled, so it can stop at any level and be secure. There's an example from Canada, and I really like the disappearing aspect of this chair. In the USA, a robotically enabled movable wall, and again this is an extreme example, but imagine how we could actually utilise this for a second bedroom. The lounge can be enhanced for Christmas entertaining. Now, importantly, these are all currently commercially available products. So how are we faring in Australia? How are our designers actually looking at small space? Okay, now this is a bit cheeky, but it does underscore my recent experience talking to the design sector, and it does make the point that in general terms, our design sector is not focused upon small space living. Why? In economic terms, on the demand side, we have a burgeoning sector. Everybody here is familiar with the statistics about the growth in residential living in Docklands, CBD, Southbank. This market has particular needs which are not being met. And this market is comprised of people who have reasonable levels of disposable income. So, on the supply side, we have a vibrant and capable design sector, and a sector that is economically important to our state. So why the gap? Okay, Economics 101. For buyers to purchase, in this case, make an investment in their apartment, buyers have to feel confident. This is the most basic tenet of marketing. To make the type of purchases I have been showing you here tonight, which are new and a little bit scary, so risky purchases, purchasers must feel confident about the overall scenario. If they have confidence that we are moving towards a SkyPad scenario, they will feel confident about investing in their homes in their futures. If they believe we are moving to the other scenario, the one that we are constantly told we are moving towards, ghettos in the sky, they will not feel confident about investing. In turn, our designers will not focus upon this new market, even if it's growing. Demand doesn't currently exist, so they will have to stimulate and educate this, and there is great uncertainty. Okay, just to finally hammer home this point. Very fortuitously, Ernst & Young have just released a report about the future of Australian cities, and I'm sure many of you have seen it. But for the purposes tonight, I want to emphasise the key message, which is the centrality of residents to the productivity and well-being of Australian cities. Obviously, the report goes into more details, but in a nutshell, they advocate placing residents, not business or events, at the heart of decision-making. And it is a great sign here tonight that our city still has such active groups as we live here who are proactively agitating for the type of future that they, as residents, want to shape. It will be a very negative indicator when you stop hearing from these groups, because it will mean that the scenario, not the desirable one, has been chosen. So to recap, we're at a crossroad, two extreme scenarios: the ghettos in the sky, which you've been hearing about tonight, the one that we are constantly told we are heading towards, or the SkyPad. To have SkyPad, we need to create conditions where residents feel confident that they have the type of future they desire. In turn, this will create conditions that are favourable to our capable design sector to service this growing market. This in turn will reinforce the confidence of residents and increasingly the wider community that this new mode of living is desirable and desirable for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. And it's interesting, the recent decision a couple of weeks ago, that I pointed out to you that the fact in that photograph the owner would be able to now keep their cats, or the next door neighbour may have bought the apartment on the basis of the rules that are registered at the titles office that would say that no one else can keep pets. So it goes back to demonstrate the consequence of the recent decision of the Supreme Court is that you could have bought your property with the expectation that your next door neighbour can't keep cats, because that's what the rules said. And when you conducted your due diligence to buy your property 2 months ago, it said that. But as a consequence of what happened last month, you now may have bought an apartment and the next door neighbour is keeping cats, or guinea pigs, whatever it might be. So that's we have to keep it focused that everyone that's bought an apartment has bought an apartment on the basis of the expectation that the rules that applicable to that property are valid. And now those expectations have been thrown out the door. So the bona fide purchasers that have bought have now bought a property whereby their expectations are not being met. Anyway, the next speaker is the Honourable Russell Morth, State MP for Morwell, National Party, and member of the Legislative Assembly since 2006, and holds the Shire Ministry of Consumer Affairs. And that leaves me also to apologise to Elaine for I did not correctly introduce you as the Honourable.
Oh, no.
Please.
I apologise, I said Russell.
Neither am I, Tim. No. I don't know why that. Thank you very much, Tim, for the kind introduction, and to my colleagues who are here this evening, the councillors present, particularly to Alan. As Alan indicated, we've both had various conversations about the issues at hand. Look, these issues are very complex, there's no doubt about that. It is how do you balance the livability of permanent residents against the ability of owners of apartments and what they're able to do with their apartments. And it's not an easy solution, and that's comes across, as Alan would have the same as I do. We have various representatives and industry groups and stakeholders who put the case both ways. Some would suggest that the legislation that is before the Parliament at the moment goes too far, and others might suggest that it doesn't go far enough. And it's our job, it's Alan's job, it's my job, and as a member of Parliament, to find out for yourself what you believe is right and wrong, and try and make the right decisions when legislation comes before the Parliament. And what we have here is a group that's really been born out of frustration and concerns over a long period of time. And I agree wholeheartedly with Alan. I think the notion that we're going to abolish party houses is only part of the issue. For a person who lives in the Latrobe Valley in the Gippsland region 2 hours away, I can't profess to knowing all your experiences because I don't live it. But I am here during the course of this Parliament week, and I have been a tenant in private apartment, and I've also been part of hotel complexes in my journey over a period of time. And I can attest there's nothing more frustrating when in Parliament late nights and early mornings when a neighbour decides to have a rowdy night. But I also know with owners of properties within apartment complexes the difficulties that body corporates have, and as part of those body corporates, the costs that add up in terms of protecting the amenity and so forth. And I think the We Live Here group have done a fantastic job in a short space of time in articulating what are those issues and concerns. So for me, what I try and do as a Member of Parliament, as the Shadow Minister for Consumer Affairs, is understand for the people who live the experience, what are your issues, how can we deal with them, how can we help resolve them into the future, and that's my job. It's about listening and consultation. And I think this is the missing piece of the jigsaw here with probably the majority of people in the room. as eligible in Queensland. That's a legislative council. I'll tell you, I'm just digressing very slightly. It's difficult for me because I'm a male and colourblind on green and red, so I have to watch very closely, and sometimes people have to guide me, is that the red light or the green light? But nonetheless, I'm also suffering from man flu, so excuse me tonight. So gentlemen in the room know it's very tough, but I'll soldier on through the rest of this evening. But it is important that we listen to the issues of people who are living the experiences, and I've had many conversations with Marshall and Russell and Barbara via email over a period of time, and have certainly come to the conclusion, as we raised in the debate in the Legislative Assembly, the concerns of not only the residents here, but also there's other groups that we shouldn't forget about, and they were put on the record, such as Brian Carney from the Australian Hotels Association, people from the tourism and hospitality industry who likewise have concerns about the current state of play with short stay accommodation in Victoria. Obviously New South Wales and other jurisdictions are grappling and dealing with this in all various forms as well, and it's not easy. But we do have to listen, and we do have to make sure that people such as you living the experience are consulted. Yes, we had the independent panel undertake their inquiry, and if you've read the report and read the conclusions, it appeared nobody could agree on anything. There wasn't a consensus on very little part of that report, and it's disappointing that people who live it every day have to contend with it. And it's not easy to strike a balance, it's not, and it's not easy for legislators, and it's not easy for regulators to come up with solutions, but what we must do is paramount about all of this is to listen to people's concerns. One of the, and again I agree with Alan and previous speakers, and I welcome David Davis, the Shadow Minister for Planning, into the room, who many you would know, and spoken many times. But it is important that you put your views and opinions to government members in the Legislative Council, to the crossbenchers in the Legislative Council, and put that view forward. I'm not saying the government would do, but government on occasion, they actually do have what they call House amendments. If they feel there's an error in their legislation, they can do it. And maybe that's something that people in the room encourage the government to consider going forward into the future. What I would like to certainly congratulate Marshall and Russell and Barbara and the whole We Live Here group, what you've done. I think it's really important. Not only have you been able to articulate what the issues are on behalf of all, but what you've been able to do as well is to propose some solutions to the issues. If government possibly introduce 3 or 4 or 5 key measures that have been put forward that members of Parliament have in their grasp, I think that's really important, because it actually says to us, well, here's a group of organisations that's not just looking at some of the issues and we're just whinging and whining about these things, but we're offering real solutions to real problems, and I think that's you to be congratulated on doing that, because it makes us all sit up and take notice. We will see what happens with the debate in the Legislative Council. I can assure you that David and Alan and I and others will continue to talk about what options are available. I anticipate it will probably come up for debate in the next Parliament sitting week, which is the week after next, but we don't know. That's up to the government for today to consider that. So go your hardest in terms of continue to lobby not only government members but also the crossbenchers as well about what you see as the issues, and again what you see as the solutions going forward. I gave a commitment to Marshall that we would, as a coalition, continue to talk and discuss these matters with you going forward, no matter whatever happens as a result of the voting in the Legislative Council. And I congratulate you on having forums like this evening. I think it's really good for us as members of Parliament to be able to address you, you asking questions of us and understanding where we sit from our perspective as well. So thank you for having me. I do have to actually duck off to another appointment at 7 o'clock, so I may not be here for the conclusion, but I do thank you for having me along this evening, and please know my door's open, as Marshall and others well know also. So thank you.
Why can't we just reinstate what everyone thought existed prior to the middle of July? It's only in July that the Supreme Court determined that the rules that everyone thought existed were invalid. And therefore, the real issue is that from the Owners Corporation members, one was shown. And remember, an Owners Corporation is made up by the members, and 75% of those members have to vote to make a rule. And the issue becomes, well, if there was legislation that said, well, the rules of Owners Corporations that existed prior to the decision of the Supreme Court were valid and remain valid, the solution is made. And of course, if the Owners Corporation wants to change its rules and allow short-term stays, they have a vote. If they don't want to change the rules, they remain what they were prior to the decision of the Supreme Court. And that is that any rule that was made, which exists in every Owners Corporation around the state of Victoria, I dare say, restricting short-term accommodation, would then be validated by legislation. And that was sort of the inference made by some of the judges in the cases that I've heard when there's been discussion about the content of legislation. The legislation is very confusing. That was the words used by Justice Reid in the case that I've used. But the solution is simple. You go back and say that the rules that existed prior to the decision of Justice Reid were valid. The legislation is the end of the matter. And then, of course, if the Owners Corporation want to allow short-term stays, they have a vote on it, and by majority rule, the majority then make the determination. Like any other way we change the laws in society, and Owners Corporation is no different. But anyway, that's just some peripheral views of my own. If I can just now introduce the Honourable David Davis, who's the State MP for the Southern Metropolitan Region and the Shadow Minister for Planning.
Can I thank you for the opportunity to speak in the first instance. I'm here until about 12 minutes past, and I've got a parliamentary committee meeting at 7:15. But you've done a remarkable job bringing a group of people like this together and having the impact that you have had. I don't pretend to have an easy solution at this point. That is the lower house finishing. I don't pretend to have an easy solution for this at the moment, and I think we were all surprised by that legal case and the impact. I take on board some of your points about referencing that case in a bill, and I don't know whether that is achievable or not, but I do think that's a plausible partial step forward. I think what is required here is a comprehensive look at this problem, and it is a developing problem of the interplay between pure residential and what seems to me to be fundamentally commercial activities. However badged, they are fundamentally commercial activities, and that's fine, but it's not fine where it brings in that impact on people's residential and quiet enjoyment of their property and the costs that are involved in that process. I'm very happy to make a commitment to this group that we will certainly come to the next election, towards the next election, with some very clear policy in this area, some announcements about how we can seek to fix a number of the very clear problems that are in evidence. It's not easy from opposition to actually frame the legislation in the way that will get a simple fix. I think with this bill, it's pretty clear that this bill is a cop-out bill. It does nothing fundamentally. I asked Barbara the other day, does it help 1 in 1,000? And she couldn't say to me it even helps 1 in 1,000. So that is the fundamental weakness of the bill. We think it may need some more examination, and I'm exploring opportunities to do that, whether we might look at moving this to a committee for some further discussion and some way for people to actually bring forward a lot of their issues. So as it comes to the Parliament, which won't be this sitting week, it'll probably be in the next sitting week where it's actually debated and dealt with. So I will give you the commitment that we will be focusing on this very closely. I know Russell has met quite a number of times and spoken quite a number of times as well, and he and I are talking about ways forward here. This is an area where I think the government has dropped the ball. Probably needed action even in the period before that, but I think in the last 18 months it's become extremely clear that this can't go on in the way that it is now, and I do have a great deal of sympathy. I think there's also a need to look at the large buildings that are being built now and the transfer of arrangements that occurs at the point of transfer, but that's a longer term task, I think, as well. A number of those, I'm aware of a whole series of different issues that have arisen there. But in terms of the right, I think, of people to fair enjoyment and the right of owners' corps to run their buildings in a fair way, I think we have got to find a better solution. It's pretty clear, though, that this bill doesn't do it, and that a more comprehensive solution is going to have to be found.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Councillor Rohan Lippert from the City of Melbourne, Deputy Chair of the Planning Portfolio, and Councillor.
Thank you very much, Tim. One of the advantages of going towards the end of the speakers list is that you can hear what everyone else has said. One of the disadvantages is that everything I've written down to say, most things, probably mostly by you, Tim, have been mentioned already. So let me limit my comments to just a couple of issues. But first of all, like other speakers, can I say thank you to the We Live Here movement, particularly Barbara and Marshall Aaron, who put this together. It's a testament, as other speakers have said, to the importance of this issue that groups like this have formed quite quickly and have grown incredibly quickly in the last couple of years. There is an issue here, and that issue is that the middle of Melbourne is one of the fastest growing areas in the country, but all of our capital cities and everywhere where you see high-rise development, we are seeing those issues of property rights interfacing with the rights of residents to enjoy their amenity really coming to a head, and the problem isn't going away, it's only increasing and will continue to increase while the development boom that we see in our cities, in the middle of our cities in particular, continues. The thing I want to say though is that the deregulated space that we've got at the moment is by design. The middle of our city in Melbourne, of all of the capital cities in Australia, has the most deregulated planning and building rules of any state or territory. The capital city zone and of course the Docklands zone as well, coupled with a building code that desperately needs updating, is not really designed for the density of living that we see. It was designed to allow pretty much any land use as of right, but like in all other states of Australia, there is no distinction between any level of accommodation. Long-term accommodation, short-term accommodation. The category of land use that you can build in the middle of the city as of right is accommodation, and of course that is the problem that so many of these other problems that we're talking about today stem from. I think that's basically the very, very first thing that Tim said at the beginning of this matter. But let me just give you a perspective from someone who's a member of the council at the City of Melbourne. And I'm a Greens member, and I'm one of the 5 out of 11 who do live inside the City of Melbourne. Everyone's referred to the fact that with our business vote and 60% non-residential vote, we're the only council impact in the country where a majority of councillors don't live in the City of Melbourne. I happen to. I currently live in Kensington, having been priced out of the city apartment that I did live in earlier, but that's another story. Ellen's mentioned the housing affordability issue that happens when you have so many apartments that are being able to generate revenue above and beyond what you normally expect it to generate should it had a long-term residential tenant in it for rent. The impacts of that on our society at large, and perhaps I feel this a little bit myself, having been priced out of the city, is problematic. It means that this is increasingly not becoming a city for everyone. It's not becoming a city where people of all demographic backgrounds and of families of different sizes or singles can afford to live. But the thing that hasn't been mentioned this evening as well is the cost of enforcing the 4 different sets of legislation that come together to create the problem that we've been talking about today. It's not just the Owners Corporation legislation that's being amended with the inadequate bill before Parliament at the moment. It's the planning scheme through the Planning and Environment Act. It's the building code through the Building Act. And I think it's also the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, which does not give our officers enough rights to go into buildings and address concerns through a rights basis mentioned through Victoria's Charter of Human Rights as well. Our officers don't actually have the authority to address these issues unless they go through the inter-19 parts of the Building and Planning Act, and often they come up against brick walls. But the cost of enforcing these inadequate building and planning laws is incredibly difficult. Just as it's important that legislators at the state level need to go into apartments in the Docklands and the CBD and South Bank and experience the issues themselves, I'd also invite them to come down and look into our office of the Municipal Building Surveyor and his staff. The work that they need to do to uphold this incredibly outdated building legislation is actually quite surprising and quite alarming. The sorts of things that they have to do just to make sure that people are complying with the laws. And of course, they're all flat out dealing with issues like the lacrosse fires, where they have to make sure that all owners are issued with notices to comply with new building orders, which they can't do because you can't get consensus among hundreds of apartment owners, and that's another issue that I won't talk about today either. But the cost to the council of enforcing these inadequate laws is all being passed on to the ratepayers of the City of Melbourne. These aren't problems that councils across the country, across the state, I beg your pardon, need to address. It's a little bit of a problem in parts of Stonington and parts of Yarra, but it is a big problem in the City of Melbourne. And the costs of enforcing inadequate state government legislation is being passed right on to you, the residents and ratepayers of the City of Melbourne. It's also being passed on to you because we need to try to get the best possible deal we can for residents through that inadequate legislation. We've been testing these cases in law. Tim's done a wonderful job setting out the journey that the City of Melbourne's been on with residents to try and test what can and can't be done in law, and it's worth every cent, but QC's come with a fee. He's done a marvellous job. But the point I want to make is that we have all these different bits of legislation that needs to be addressed holistically if we're going to tackle the issue of central city livability properly. So it's not just the Owners Corporation Act, it's a holistic look. It's an issue that needs to have genuine community input into a process that addresses this properly, not the flawed panel process that we've seen that other speakers have commented on. I think Ellen's reasoned amendment to the bill that she mentioned in her speech would have stopped the bill that we currently have here and reopened this question more holistically and asked for more community genuine input so that we can have a look at the problems that do stem from the fact that there's no distinction between types of accommodation in our planning and building codes, and look at the ramifications of that. Now, reverse engineering this so that we do start to have categories is incredibly complicated, as all the speakers today have said. But while we keep on considering one bill after the other that only tinkers around the edges of the Owners Corporation Act, we're not dealing with the main issue. And the longer this takes, the more the expense it's going to take to enforce this inadequate and outdated sets of state government legislation, the more, thousands and thousands and thousands of dwellings that are being approved in the middle of the city, in the City of Melbourne, which must be approved under the planning scheme because, my goodness, they all comply, don't they, because the rules are so deregulated. And so the problem is not right away. We can't put a hold on new development in the City of Melbourne, and that would probably crash the economy if it did, so I'm not advocating we do that. But we're not stemming this problem at all. While we're tinkering around the edges of the Owners Corporations Bill, we're not going back to the nub of the issue. So those are the bigger issues that I would like to tackle. Unfortunately, I'm a member of the council, not a member of the state parliament, but I think that with the size of meetings like this, it is testament to the fact that this problem is something that legislators across the board are going to have to deal with, because they are going to look over there and say, my goodness, that is something we have to take attention of. The council, just for the record, did resolve unanimously based on a motion of my Greens colleague, Councillor Roke, to write to the Minister relevant and to all legislators at the state level to reopen this question and have a more holistic look, not just at the Owners Corporation Act, but also at the Building Code, at the Planning Scheme, and also the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, so that we can have a holistic group. So the council certainly is on side, and with the funding of the Watergate legal fees and all the rest of it, I hope that that's understood. This is definitely something that does need to be tackled at the state government level. Council will continue to advocate that as strongly as possible. I'll continue to advocate that as strongly as possible, someone who does live here in the middle of the city, because as Ellen said, what we want to do is make sure that we're building communities, not building buildings. That means we need to build well-designed homes with rules that suit everybody, not just more investment properties that are attracting problems of their own. So thank you very much for being here, and keep talking.
Thank you, Roman. When I was sitting there just listening to Roman speak, I reflected upon what the New South Wales Court of Appeal in one case did when they looked at the question of the validity of a rule. What they like here, like in Victoria, in New South Wales the rules are registered on title. Like in Victoria, the rules are registered on title. So if I'm going to buy a property, I will read the rules, because I think the Section 32 statement, the rules are now attached. Alternatively, you do a property search and you see there the rules are on title, so you read the rules. And what the New South Wales Court of Appeal did in one case was saying that, well, how can an owner who buys into a property where the rule clearly states you can't have short-term letting, all words to that effect was a different issue, but using for the example short-term letting, come back and subsequently say, well, you know, I bought the property, the rule was there, yes, I had notice of it, because it was registered on title, but I want to challenge the rule because I want to use it again for short-term letting. That's the essence of what's happened now, but unfortunately no form of stop or no legal principle rises by virtue of the fact that the rule is registered on title. The argument that people that buy units are unfairly treated if they can't short-term let them, really it runs fairly inconsistent with and contrary to the fact that any purchaser has notice of the rules applicable to that owner's corporation, and of course that purchaser then doesn't have to buy that property. There's no obligation upon a purchaser to buy a property when the owner's corporation says you can't short-term let, or you can't keep pets. That purchaser can then go to another building. So it seems to me that a simple issue can become very complicated, but it is a simple issue, and that is that why can't a group of owners in one building have the right to determine, by majority, by 75%, how that building is used? But unfortunately, that's not the case as a result, as we know, of the recent decision. Now, I'd like to then call our last speaker, Mr. Russ Fiddleson, who is the Managing Director of International Brand Management Company Look at Me and Deputy Chairperson of Watergate Owners Corporation and Director of We Live Here.
Thank you. It looks like I have to do this in 5 minutes. If it's sort of sleep time to come up 5 minutes, so that's the time, right? So, right, so just a little bit about the group. You know, and that's why you're here, it's about people, it's about residents living in apartments. And we now represent 140 buildings across the country and internationally, so I can give you a bit of a rundown of where we're represented. So there's 24 apartments in South Bank, 26 in Docklands, and 43 in the city. And we've also got apartment buildings joining us from other states, and also one in the USA, in California. So we're becoming a global movement. So I think we've successfully become a national movement, and now we're setting our sights even higher. So thanks to everyone here for coming along and being part of that success. And it's been gratifying to know that we've had such a big impact, and it's been really good to have the time and the attention of the Honourable Helen Sandell and Honourable Russell North and Honourable David Davis. It's been amazing that we could get that audience, get that get our issues in front of the politicians. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked the same on the other side of the house. But that's what we're going to ask everyone here tonight to be part of making that happen, that it does get to the government. So, next. Now, there are a number of issues that have been touched on tonight, and one of the issues of costs of wear and tear on a building caused by short stay apartments. Now, we have some figures prepared, and we can see that with an apartment building of 400 units, where there are 40 or 10% of the apartments are used for short stays, it results in 80 tonne of laundry being moved. And so that the current operator who's in Watergate, for example, is moving around 25 tonne of laundry. And the suitcase trips per year are just enormous. And just the door accesses and lift usage, it just goes through the roof. The costs go up dramatically. And we can say this, that you don't have to rely on this because other people are doing the work. And I have the Maestri Towers consultants report here, which is the quantity surveyors report, which says that the Oaks short stay apartments there cost the Owners Corporation $350,000 in a year. We have a report by consulting engineers on lifts and escalators for the Maestri Towers in Sussex Street in Sydney, $150,000, and shortened the lifespan of the lifts by 25%. So we're starting to get data. Last time we had a launch in December, we said we're going to get data. This is our artillery. This is our artillery. We're going to present this information, and experts are starting to do it for us. So we can put it together ourselves just on our own analysis, because to put all this together took a lot of work by Wheatley Beer Movement and the Watergate Apartments to analyse all the swipe movements. So you can do this yourself in your own apartments. Is you analyse the security readings of the swipes. You know which ones are which ones are short stay and which are not. You can do all these figures yourself, and you can come to the government with those figures as well, your own hard data. So part of this struggle, we're based on facts. We're based on facts. A lot of the arguments are emotive. This is a fact. The fact is that owners are being ripped off by having to pay and subsidise the businesses. So there's a commercial use of the property, and all owners are paying for it. Now, a little video, which I'm hoping to play before the battery goes out. So this is now the battery has it.
Much of it on TV, do something like that.
Right. So this is some laundry movement in Watergate. So I might just it's just a bit, I might just rewind a bit. So suitcases moving in and out, we know what damage they cause, and this is part of what this report talks about, the damage to the amenity, and also just running electricity costs, repair, wear and tear. And this is what Watergate is putting up with every day of the week, so it's pretty much out of control. And the suitcases have to be taken up to an apartment because there's no reception. Like these buildings haven't been built with a reception. There's no service elevator. They're going up through regular elevators. So the suitcases are taken into just an ordinary apartment which serves as a reception. Then they're taken to another apartment. So they go up and down the lifts all day. They go up and down ordinary lifts. They block the lifts. They block the lifts with the suitcase and the door leans over. We have a lift engineer in our apartment who explained that 6 to 10 times that you block the lifts with something to put, a service call will be required. So how do you apportion that? Part of the deal here is that we're restricted to charging on lot liability, and yet we see that you've got commercial operators who are moving in and taking over apartments wholesale, causing costs to other owners. It's not fair. It needs to be made fair. So these are the things we're putting up with, the costs, and this is what apartments are turning into. Ghettos in the sky, you've got pictures of it right here in front of you. So just creating fire hazards, blocking the hallways, making it inconvenient, and just making it very trashy, really. So this is laundry, suitcases, wear and tear, real costs, and quantifiable costs, which experts are starting to put big numbers on. So
Does that equate to garbage as well?
everything, electricity, you could go through. This is what this report has done. It's counted all the energy costs and so forth of the extra facilities that are used by the short-stay apartments. So, and I think we're going to have to do more of that sort of work, because where this battle will be won is in legislation. I think that's pretty clear. And the legislation has to change, and we have to make politicians aware of this sort of problem of lack of fairness. Everything has to be done fairly. And I'll come back to So you've got the wear and tear, you've got the fact that these commercial operators do not have to comply with the regulatory compliance costs, like the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. The council can't get in there, as Councillor Rohan has pointed out. They don't even have to comply with that legislation. We had, in the height of Watergate short stay, when we had 45 apartments, we had one of the operators who, for the short stays, who made the guests sign a lease saying that bed lice were not his problem. So that's you run a gamut, because a gamut of operators. There's you get operators of all different standards, and I do take issue with the concept of rogue operator. I think maybe after you've seen the video tonight, you might redefine what rogue is, because it's just systemic to the way the apartments are being used. It is just intrinsic to the nature of the business. It is a commercial business working in a residential apartment building, and it's exploiting loopholes that everybody else has to pay for. And short stays should pay their way, and they're not paying their way. They haven't been paying GST, and that is, okay, they're cheaper than hotels. Why are they cheaper than hotels? Because they don't pay work cover to the cleaners, they pay cash in hand to the cleaners, the cleaners are not protected by insurance. There's all sorts of reasons why this unregulated industry needs to be regulated, because it's breaking the law in so many areas that it's just so hard to prosecute. And it needs to be fixed holistically, it needs to be fixed in a number of areas. So tax, compliance issues, work cover and insurance. Now, as a good example, Watergate has received building orders from Tim's former client to install extra fire precautions and escape, and we have to pay for that. So that Watergate is actually subsidising again, because again, lot liability is what we're restricted to. the time now? Okay. Anyway, thank you very much for Honourable Alan Sandell, Rowan Leopard, and Tim Margetts for chairing, and the departed guests. And we are going to have question and answer time.
Going to have one question or one statement, just because we've run out of time, but just one thing to ponder, especially for the lawmakers to ponder, and this is that at the moment there is a way that the new buildings are going to avoid the application of this issue, and it's going to affect therefore the capital value of the buildings that can't avoid the issue. And what's happening now, I'm told, is that by some other property lawyers, is that what a developer will do is they'll sell the building with a restricted covenant. So it's on title. So the restricted covenant will say on that title that the unit can't be used for short-term letting. So there'll be people, as time moves on, that will only buy apartments through resale or off the plan that have that restricted covenant because they won't want to live in an apartment with the risk of having a party gate. And that's a real issue that's going to affect the thousands upon thousands of unit holders that currently own units in the city of Melbourne and or in Victoria. Anyway, that's just a further thought for you all to consider as to why it's important there needs to be some degree of regulation here, because it's only going to be a matter of time as a result of this decision, which only 4 or 5 weeks ago, that the real implications will become clear and it will become harder to resell the property. It will have a direct effect on the capital value of the property upon resale. That concludes all our speakers, and I believe this is going to be a brief question or statement from one of our guests tonight, briefly.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
If you want to do that now, I think it's appropriate time. Well, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Okay, I'll be very brief. I'm from Melbourne. I'm a chairperson of an Owners Corporation. Lived in those buildings and owned the Owners Corporation for 40 years. 6 very short points. The studies and literature of urban sociology, in Western industrial democracies have borne out that the increase in urbanisation and high density living brings with it a level of anonymity and alienation in a residential physical environment. And this may increase significantly. However, buildings are well designed and well constructed. This can be ameliorated to quite a considerable extent. Some 30% of all housing stock in Victoria is in multi-unit buildings, owner corporation administered buildings, and 25% of the population lives in them as owner-occupiers or as tenants. And the increased lack of physical security, in a well-managed environment, sharing common facilities, people know and communicate in a residential community, particularly elderly persons who come there with the security of tenure in mind. There is, of course, this tendency that in future more and more buildings will be used and occupied for short stays, therefore be competing with the owner-occupied and the long-term residential tenancy market. Also, more administration for owners' corporations, committees like our own, which are voluntary committees, to police, the changes to the Act. And in fact, Section 159A makes no mention that any short stay occupant must adhere to any specific set of rules, of that particular owners' corporation. That's in itself already an issue. So additional burdens are placed. And finally, I want to say that governments, both Liberal and Labor, they've got strategies, they say, adopting affordability to have encouraged more households to live in medium density housing and quality, well-designed, constructed housing. However, I think that, what happens if this legislation becomes law, that a lot of particularly families and people who are looking for security of tenure, and they look for a secure, well-managed community living, would be, see this as a deterrent, to go and live in medium density and high density owner-occupied building. So the bill is very flawed, and again, doesn't address what the very important issues are at stake. Thank you.
I think that concludes our forum. Thank you all for coming, and hope you enjoyed the evening and found it informative. And I believe there are refreshments outside. Free for all.
I think it's important to end my speech, which is that it is really imperative that everybody contacts, firstly, their upper house members of parliament, both all Liberal National and Labor government members. The bill will come in the next few weeks, so if you are concerned about this, contact them. And also, if you are in South Bank, your local member of parliament, Martin Foley, who's a member of the government, it's very difficult for me to get up and argue without pressure from the community. So it's much, much more effective if you're also lobbying the government, and I'll do my part within Parliament and you do your part without Parliament, and hopefully together we can get this fixed.
That's something on the screen here, which is something I'd like to put up, which is pretty much what Alan has said, to do the lobbying. But you can visit our website at welivhere.net, have a look at the policy, and that can be the basis of the discussion that you have with your member. Thank you.